Hi, everyone. Well, welcome to our keynote session. Before we get started for this, I should have mentioned during the opening remarks that this entire conference is also accredited with continuing educational units from the International Society of Arboriculture. So information after this event will come out on how to collect your CEUs for those in attendance. So I'm joined by Larry Kahn, who is adjunct professor and director of the Tulane University Law School Utility Vegetation Management Institute, for our keynote address, which is the changing map, a strategic assessment of the continental wildfire threat. So over to yourself, Larry, and thanks for joining us today.
Okay, thank you, Nick, and greetings everyone from Canberra, Australia, the capital of Australia, where I'm here in Australia for about a month, talking about wildfire issues as they relate to vegetation management. So the moving wildfire map. We are well beyond the point in time where the western states are the only uh, fire affected states. The Western Wildfire Map has been useful for quite some time, but as Nick described in his opening remarks, we are now in a position where there's a new vanguard, a new group of states that are exposed to wildfire. And instead of a situation where the fires are simply moving from west to east, they're spreading in different sorts of ways. And so we're going to look at the manner in which the map is changing and what needs to be done to adjust to all of this. So, what is the moving wildfire map? The geographical expansion of wildfire risk into these new regions has been drawn by a number of different factors, and among them are climate variability and extreme weather. So, while we can say for certain we have had hotter, drier weather all across the country, what we are seeing is that it's in deep pockets. And from this map that you can see certain areas are really, really dark red. And it's areas that include places that we would normally think of as wet. Look at South Louisiana and Florida as examples. And then the Great Lakes states, a lot of northern Michigan is in that really, really dark red. We're no longer surprised about the red areas out west, but some of these areas are striking and new. And why is that occurring? Well, it has to do with uh, not just the change in weather, but the density of the vegetation, the species that are existing in these places, which are getting increasingly mixed in a manner that includes invasive species that are more susceptible to fire than the species that are traditionally found in these areas. In addition, we have human activity. It's the expansion of human development into areas that were previously wild. It's what we call the wildland urban interface. And the management of land in such spaces has not necessarily kept up with where it needs to be. And so the risk that's changing, it's not a steady progression, but instead it's a dynamically changing situation that is popping up in all kinds of places, and most worryingly, in places that are underprepared for this kind of activity that could lead to massive wildfire problems. So, historically, the high risk regions were California, parts of the Pacific Northwest, and the Rocky Mountain states. But now, what we're seeing is wildfire risk increasing in the rest of the country, including the Southeast and the Gulf South, the Mid Atlantic states, and the Northeast, and the upper Midwest and Northern states. And sadly, now with massive wildfires raging across Nebraska and Kansas, the Great Plains as well. In the eastern United States, and this is a large wildfire that occurred in actually my hometown where I grew up in Rockaway, New Jersey. Uh, the What we're seeing is recent evidence that uh, fires are expanding and are having a much larger impact. In states like North and South Carolina, evacuations on a massive scale and emergency declarations have occurred within the last few years. Similarly, New Jersey had thousands of acres in forest fires. The state of Florida has also experienced 20,000 plus acre wildfires that have affected infrastructure. In fact, the largest fire in Florida's history was also the largest fire in Georgia's history. It was the Bugaboo Fire, and caused, at least in part, by a down power line that struck dry vegetation. These are the kinds of stories that states that are on the East Coast are not really used to hearing, and certainly not with frequency, but they are occurring now. And one of the worrying things on the East Coast is the impact on human life, because the states in the East are far more densely populated. And so land values are higher, and uh, on average. And the problem with the uh, effect of a massive fire is that quite often there's nowhere really to go in terms of evacuation. The structures that have been built are not built to withstand a massive wildfire. And because properties and homes and businesses are so closely packed together, they're more susceptible of wildfires becoming urban fires and then feeding new wildfires from there, where the urban fire becomes a wildfire feeder. And that dangerous situation is one that we witnessed in January of last year in Los Angeles, and it presents a real danger here in the East as well. In the Gulf South, we're seeing the same sorts of things, and some of the unique drivers include many of the same factors, but more of a wet dry cycle that is happening, where it's extremely wet, extremely dry, and back and forth. And part of the problem with that is that this is an area that has been experiencing multiple hurricanes year after year. Fortunately, this past year was not highly impactful from hurricanes, but over time, a lot of vegetative debris, broken branches from trees and other damaged vegetation that never really came back from the force of hurricanes past, has compiled, and it has built up quite substantially. And when a period of drought occurs, even if it's not a prolonged drought, the plant life in these areas is not used to being without water for extended period of time. And so as a result, it dries out fairly quickly. And while a utility ignited fire is certainly a risk, so are lightning strikes. And because many of these areas, like this swamp fire pictured here that occurred in Louisiana, uh, because these areas are remote, when the fire occurs, it is extremely hard to get resources to put those fires out. The areas are inaccessible to anything but boats typically, or aircraft. And the ability to fight such fires is really dramatically reduced. And the states in these areas are less prepared in terms of having the appropriate hardware and the necessary firefighting training and preparation for dealing with such situations before they occur. They need to catch up. They need to catch up quickly, is really the message. Northern states are experiencing much of the same problem. The problem in the northern states is that it's also being compounded by problems with insect attacks on various different tree types. And so bark beetle is having an impact, other diseases that are impacting trees. So what you wind up having is a lot of standing dead timber with not sufficient efforts at removing that standing dead timber, leaving a large danger of dried out vegetative material that can burn. And we've seen fires in places, once again, that we traditionally view as wet, like Minnesota, uh, with 30,000 burned acres and over 150 structures damaged from fires in recent in the last couple of years. We've seen the Camp House fire there destroyed over 140 structures, and it burned for a full month before any containment was really achieved. So once again, land of lakes and not and all kinds of water availability, and yet massive wildfire problem. The northern forest is not exempt either. There's been excessive periods and extensive periods of warmer than average temperatures, below average precipitation, and again, pest-driven tree mortality, like the spruce budworm. This has all led to a rapid drawing of fuels that remain on the ground. There's not much effort being made in an organized fashion to keep the fuels from accumulating, and it's resulted in disaster. Massachusetts had the butternut fire in 2024 with 1,100 acres burned. New York has seen, among other fires, the Jennings Creek fire, which resulted in the death of a firefighter, and 5,300 acres burned. New Hampshire, similarly, an increase in wildfires year over year. So from 2024 to 2025, they've experienced a doubling of the number of burned acres. And that is a very worrying trend. These are not states that are anticipating this kind of fire action. And it's occurring at times when limited resources are being deployed in the Western states. That means that very little by way of sharing can occur with respect to firefighting aircraft. Now, that's not to say that the Eastern states don't have any, but they're certainly not as practiced, and they're insufficient in number. So, what really needs to be done is make an effort to prevent the fires in the first place. Looking at regional data across the eastern and northern United States, wildfires have increased over 50% above 10-year averages, and the burned acreage has increased 159%. Um, this is not anecdotal. This is not just some weird fire that occurred that was unpredicted and was not part of what was being anticipated. This is evidence scientifically of a systemic expansion of fire from west across all the coastal states, north, south, and east, and also moving from west to east simultaneously. And there's spillover effects. If we look at the Canadian wildfires that have been occurring over the last several years, the issue is not one of blame Canada, but it's more of a problem of their inability to put out massive fires that occur in their northern territories. And in those cases, the fires expanded. Many of those fires are the result of lightning strikes, but what has happened is the smoke coming from those fires have had a spillover effect into many of our northern states and traveling south all the way to New York and Washington, D.C. That's traveling quite a far way. And in many states and in many cities, public health concerns from those smoke events have resulted in shutdowns of cities and of work efforts outdoors. And these kinds of impacts, these kinds of impacts are occurring when and where uh, the work needs to be done to do the veg management in these states at that time. It's interrupting efforts, and that is also causing problems. and dealing with the smoke inhalation causing health concerns south of the border is something that really needs to be resolved. It's not necessarily the fire itself, but the impact of those fires on the US. And that is something that is coming from north to south. Hmm, there. So why is this map moving? And as I've been saying, it's rising temperatures, the drought expansion across the United States, changing precipitation patterns where you get massive amounts of water all at once, and then it's gone for long periods of time. And that is not something that the plant life is easily adjusting to. We have vegetation overgrowth, where for years, vegetation management as part of land management across public lands and private lands has not been done in a manner that is consistent with good wildfire prevention practice, leaving large pockets of heavy fuel on the ground situations. And because of overgrowth, they're hard to see at this point with the naked eye. So that compounded with our continuous efforts at expanding our population centers into the WUI, into the wildland urban interface, is a continuing issue as well that is causing the map to move faster with wildfires affecting the rest of the country. What's the role of vegetation? Well, it is a natural asset and it's a wildfire fuel. So these risk variables are the ones that make the most impact. How dense is the vegetation? How does it continue from one area to the next? Is it moist or not? And how close is it to infrastructure? Places like California have enacted legislation that mandates that defensible space must be done by all property owners in order to be able to protect structures. That's important if there's any effort involved in sheltering in place and to save the highest value pieces of property, even when an evacuation has occurred. If defensible space is not done, that becomes much, much harder. And the fire authorities in California have reported that as many as half of all structures can be saved if defensible space is done. But states outside, and including the states that we're talking about now, in the east, in the south, and in the north, defensible space is a foreign concept. It's something that you've heard of being done out west, but it's not practiced and it's certainly not required. And that is causing all of these problems, especially as people enjoy plantings closer to their homes. And when water restrictions go into effect because of droughts, these vegetated areas close to homes are actually fuel. And it's not viewed that way by the property owners. And that is a rising concern as wildfire risk increases as well. Utilities have a role to play. There are numerous ignition pathways. That's not to say that every fire is a utility related problem. It's not. But the prevalence of high wind days is increasing, and it's important to remember that the infrastructure that we see around us, that has been built to an engineering standard that assumes essentially a force 1 hurricane kind of kind of strength to the wind force. And even though the infrastructure is built to withstand that, the trees are not. And so what you have in super high wind days is trees breaking apart. If you're in the south, you're seeing palm trees, for example, with their big fan-like leaves, moving in high winds a very far distance, and they can impact the lines, causing sparking, causing arcing, and causing the lines themselves, in case there's multiple phases, to essentially slap one another and spark cause release of energy in an uncontrolled manner. And when that strikes dry vegetation is when you can have an ignition event. And the wind will drive those fires into areas that are probably containing large amounts of fuel. So, utility vegetation management is a form of risk control. And in fact, I would argue it's the most important one. And here's why. There are a number of different factors that contribute to a fire getting exacerbated. One of them is the weather itself. And while we're getting better and better at predicting the weather, frankly, there's not a lot we can do about it. It is what it is. So knowing what the weather is only helps you to prepare, but it's not a factor that you can control. The next factor is topography. And all the bulldozers and excavators in the world are not going to change the general topographic uh, layers that you have within a utilities territory. That is just simply not something that you can really control either. The third factor is the ignition sources. And again, there's not much that you can do. There are now ways that you can detect when there appears to be a fault, but uh, ultimately, on high windy days, the ignitions will occur and sparking will occur. So what's left? The only ingredient is the vegetation. Fortunately, that is an ingredient that we have nearly complete control over. We can impact the plant communities we have. We can effectively re-landscape in areas that require better, stronger protection. And that means removing the fuels from the ground and being purposeful about what plants exist and don't exist in the areas that are under our control. So, from a utility standpoint, it really ought to be less about the per line mile cost of doing vegetation management, and it should be more about the, the enterprise risk that is being reduced by doing vegetation management properly. When that is done correctly, then you can have positive outcomes and you can actually show your insurers that you are trying to control the one factor you have any control over. If you're not doing that, then what it looks like to an insurer is that you're allowing for essentially limitless risk to exist and unpredictable outcomes to occur. So, utilities in these new high risk regions are facing the kinds of problems that we've seen the Western utilities experience. And this includes problems with insurance and the need to speed up the ability of wildland firefighters to be able to address these problems in an era now where fewer and fewer people are getting into this line of work. How do you make up for the shortage of experienced workforce? And that is where technology could perhaps provide advantage, both with respect to detecting areas that are most at risk and using things like robotics to help fight the fires that might occur, and in that way save human lives. Instead of sending in people, you send in drones and you send in robotic machines that can work on fighting the fire and only use people where you need to. This will help address both the workforce problem as well as human health and safety. Um, Machines can be replaced while people cannot. But we also have a regulatory lag. We see at least some positive regulations and positive steps going on in the Western states that have dealt with wildfire for much longer periods of time. Plus, they've invested in things like their own weather detection systems that, again, are lacking on the East Coast and on the Gulf Coast and in the Pacific, in the northern states as well. these states are finding and should be finding quickly that they are not prepared in the way the Western states are for risk that is definitely headed their way. So, what do you do? Now, fortunately, they do have control of a lot of data. States in the East, in particular, have been taking data on vegetation and on land management for a very, very, very long time. It's time to put that data to use to be able to amplify it with technology solutions that can help predict where the fires are most likely to occur and of those areas where it's likely to be the worst. And by doing that, we can start addressing this challenge. Let's see. There we go. So the vegetation that exists across the country is, of course, not uniform, and so as a result, the regulatory response as well as the physical response to the vegetation that exists needs to be different. And that means, for example, dealing with tree mortality, dealing with drying cycles, dealing with uh, insects and other pests that are attacking the trees, because it's not just a economic issue, it's not just a sightliness issue. This is creating wildfire risk in places that are underprepared to deal with those fires. The wildland urban interface is also a problem. This is where regulation can really help out, and thus far has not really done a good job, particularly in eastern, southern, and northern states in America. What we're seeing is that new homes are being built in forested areas or areas that were previously forested. And within these areas, we are seeing building codes and building standards that are equal to the building standards in areas where there weren't forests. And so you have homes being built in a manner that is not showing an increased appreciation for the wildfire risk that those homes are being built in. And so instead of having homes that are fire resistant, these are essentially just the standard homes that we see everywhere else. And that makes them more susceptible when they're placed in areas that are at higher risk already. The cost of inaction is enormous and it will lead to loss of life. And unless our regulators are going to get on the ball and start moving forward uh, with efforts that are going to be aggressive in suppressing uh, wildfire risk by getting behind mitigation efforts, including particularly vegetation management, uh, we're going to see massive, massive problems. And unfortunately, what will happen also is that there will be essentially a knee jerk reaction where efforts are made to bring in uh, regulations that may not be well informed, that may not be consistent with the best science. And then utility companies and industry partners and private citizens will have to adjust to a new regime that doesn't necessarily really protect them. And important allies will see that and retreat. And that is what we've seen in the West, where there's less and less access to wildfire insurance. Insurance is a key partner. And instead of being pushed away through bad thinking, poor practice, they should be brought in as a partner. And discussion should be held with insurers as to what can be done to work together to create incentives and to develop proper regulations and laws that will protect people and force good behavior that will lower wildfire risk in these newly expanded areas. Technology, fortunately, is a force modifier. And by using technology appropriately and properly, we can do things like detect areas that are at greater wildfire risk. This is not just a matter of improving and increasing efficiency, helping companies be more profitable. It's not really about that, particularly with regard to electric utility companies. From that standpoint, what technology can do is really amplify the ability to target and triage where the highest risk areas are from both a intensity point of view as well as a likelihood point of view. And one of the keys to that is, in fact, satellite technology. The there are advantages and disadvantages to every kind of technology, but one of the things that satellite technology is able to offer is nationwide monitoring. Wide scale efforts can be done using satellites because of the position further up and ability to look down. Proper use of satellite technology includes early detection of vegetation stress. That there are areas where heat can be detected coming from certain areas, which is an indication that those areas are undergoing extreme stress. It's not to say it's a wildfire start in particular, but what it is showing is a fair amount of vegetative decay. And these things be identified through satellite technology. And that means that fuel conditions that are excessive in particular areas can be spotted, identified, and then processed so that workers on the ground can start clearing those areas as a priority and figure out which areas to prioritize over which other areas in an effort to try to catch up. Satellite analytics enables all kinds of beneficial things, including monitoring and prediction. Regrowth tracking is important, and satellites have been taking images of all of North America for quite some time. And that enables the ability to do a certain amount of change detection. You can overlay one set of satellite images over another and see where things have changed. And with a large amount of attention to and use of artificial intelligence in analyzing these images, there are ways to be able to do better risk forecasting, program validation for utilities to make sure that efforts to contain and control vegetation along utility pathways are in fact succeeding, uh, spotting areas that may have been missed, and being able to target where corrective work needs to be done still. This enables states in the newly impacted areas in the vanguard to be able to shift from a reactive state where, oh no, there's a fire, let's do something, to a predictive and proactive effort led through utility vegetation management and informed by satellite analytics. Ultimately, what we're going to need is an integrated technology stack where satellite plays a leading role, but it includes other technologies as well, combining not only satellite data, but LiDAR coming from aerial sources or even ground sources, drones, other remote sensors, and of course, artificial intelligence to be able to do the analysis. Having a full spectrum wildfire risk intelligence system is going to be critical to protecting people in wildfire prone areas, which, as we've been saying throughout this keynote, is expanding across the entire country. The entire country is becoming a wildfire prone area. And the way to protect people in the vanguard states and in the vanguard territories of the utilities in those states, it's going to be necessary to invest in all of these different technologies. And probably the best place to start with is satellite data and getting that information so you have that overview of what your territory looks like and where the danger areas exist. There will be regulatory implications. As wildfires spread eastwards and around the coasts, regulatory expectations will follow. And it's a matter of what are they going to be, and are the utilities and other interested players, are they going to get in on the ground floor now to strengthen standards. And that is going to be a real requirement. Utilities will do the work that they're directed to do, but they need to be directed to do it, and they need to be directed at a time where you're not already in a panic or recovering following a major disaster. That's when bad decisions occur. Good decisions occur when you're looking at the science, analyzing the risk, determining where to focus, and figuring out what can you do with the budget you have and what can you do with the budget you think you will have. Documentation on behalf of the utilities is going to be a critical factor. Proving that you've spent the money wisely that was allocated to you is going to be extremely important as a matter of public responsibility, and to avoid the potential that utilities are painted as the bad guys in this situation. It's really critically important that that not happen, because when it does happen, uh, hugely difficult problems arise. We've seen that in the Western states where the utilities are attacked and have, in California in particular, essentially unlimited liability regardless of fault. And that is the kind of thing that can happen if utilities aren't out front trying to work with regulators to establish regulations that are going to protect people, and then following up and making sure that work is being done and documented properly. And that means not just a spreadsheet. In today's age, you need to have video and photographic imagery, you need satellite imagery, you need to be able to demonstrate with pictures that you've done the work that you said you were going to do and that you were allocated funds to do. So, what are some of the strategic takeaways here? Well, the wildfire map is certainly moving, and it's increasing in the Gulf region, in the east, particularly in the Atlantic corridor, and in the north, in the Great Lakes and in the Northeast. Vegetation is central to that risk. If it wasn't for dry vegetation and fuel on the ground, there wouldn't be a fire problem because there'd be no fuel to burn. Um, Technology is enabling scale, and it's something that we should be looking at as not our savior. Um, it doesn't replace our judgment. What it does is it serves as a tool to better protect against the highest risk categories. It enables us to triage until the time when we've worked out solutions that are going to fully protect us and integrate in the way we live our lives. So here's our closing thought. Wildfire risk is no longer where it was. The real question that we need to be analyzing is, what are we doing to manage vegetation where wildfire risk is going? We know where it's going. What are we doing to manage the vegetation where it's headed? You can't leave the fuel on the ground. That is going to be a major danger issue for anyone living in these areas that are currently underprepared. So, this slide presentation is going to be available to everyone. There's a little bit here about Tulane Law School and the Utility Vegetation Management Program that is at Tulane Law School, looking at areas where law is impacted by and does the governance over the interface between the built environment and the natural environment. Here's a little bit about myself. And uh, Nick, I don't know if there's opportunity for Q&A, but if there is.
Yeah, so I think we've got 5 or 6 minutes here. So if anyone does have any questions, then please just raise them in the bar on the right-hand side. There was one question, more of a comment, I think, actually, Larry, which was prioritizing the risk in high fire threat areas without a nearly equal level of attention in the WUI and urban areas may only transfer the risk to the urban areas.
That's true. It could have that impact. But I think that we need to be more thoughtful and more choiceful about what we're doing in the WUI. I mean, we're not going to stop people from moving out of urban areas and into forested areas. I mean, people love such areas and they want to be in those areas. So they will naturally move to them. The question is, what are we doing to build in a proper way in those areas and to manage the vegetation that's on the ground? Because areas that are more heavily forested are more likely to have wildland fires occur.
Thanks, Larry. A question from my side. When you mentioned that you're in Canberra at the moment for a month, I looked at the time and date in Canberra and saw that it's 3:30 in the morning for you.
Yes,
So
that's
first
true.
off,
Yes.
hats off to you for joining at that time.
Uh, my
But
pleasure. It's an important topic and needs to be addressed.
yeah, so just curious, what's your mission at the moment in Canberra? Obviously there's lots of veteran utilities in Australia as well. Does your mission there play into the topic of conversation today?
It it does actually. I'm here in Australia for about a month, and so I've finished, I guess, about a week and a half or so. The first week has to do with the International Wildfire Risk Mitigation Consortium, which is a group of electric utilities from around the world that are interested in stopping the utility ignited wildfire problem. And so there's an annual meeting. This year it was in Brisbane and was hosted by Powerlink. And there was a pre-meeting that was also hosted by AusNet, and that was in Melbourne. And so between those two meetings, there was a lot of discussion amongst utilities, and these are the utilities with the greatest level of experience with respect to dealing with wildfires. And so I'm the facilitator of the vegetation management working group within that organization. And so we met on a number of different topics and collaborated and had good discussions and met with technology providers and others who have a role to play in helping to solve the wildfire challenge. From there, I've had meetings with academics throughout Australia. That effort is continuing, and we'll be meeting with academic service providers as well as various utilities, not just electric, but road, rail, forest, a number of different utilities that have needs within vegetation management to be able to control the wildfire problem. It's the start of what's being called the UVM project, which is an effort to share knowledge and expertise, law, regulation, policy, and practice from North America, primarily US and Canada, with Australia, and to see what can be done to foster learning and to speed up the learning curve, to break down silos of where good research is being done, but it's not being communicated effectively to decision makers so that they can use the science and engineering advances to be able to make positive change for people. And so by by doing the sharing and by launching this project, the intent is to be able to develop about 20 years of learning within the next 10.
Brilliant. Well, that sounds like a fantastic mission. We're going to have to leave things there, Larry, so that we can move across to our next speaker. So, yeah, again, thank you for joining today. You're always a great speaker, and yeah, hats off again for joining at some crazy hour in the morning. So, look forward
My
to
pleasure.
meeting.
Thank you for
Thank you,
having
Larry.
me, and good luck with the rest of the program. It looks like a fantastic program, and I look forward to watching a video replay.
Thanks, Larry.
Take care.
So for everyone in the audience here, this session will now close. Again, it will back you out, excuse me, to the home screen. You can click on the next session, which is from Melissa Semser. So I'll see you in the next one. Thanks, Larry.